The future is coming, ready or not, and I prefer, and I think most people prefer, that we be ready for it. And that means assuring that we have the people with the skills for the jobs, not just of today, as critical as that is, but of tomorrow, and anticipating that rather than trying to catch up, as we so often do. Industry is evolving rapidly, and we want to be ready for it. And you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican to understand that being ready for it means caring about and preparing the workforce.
For a while, we had a really good conversation going in this country about the American workforce, about what works and what doesn't in education. And now, ironically, as we've learned more and more about what really works in education, there's far less discussion on the political level, whether it be executive or legislative branch, about how we make certain that actually happens in our schools. And we see the results of that. We saw some disastrous NAEP results come out recently. And we know that all translates into people not being ready for the workforce. So this is that critical issue that unfortunately we're not talking about anymore. While the right and left are far apart on so many issues, this is one of those, making certain that everyone, regardless of income level, regardless of background, has an equal opportunity to have a shot at a great job. You know, where are you going to find the political difference in that? Now let's go talk about how we do it. And that's why I'm excited about this commission. We're going to talk about how you actually do that.
BBC created the Commission on the American Workforce to bring together stellar leaders from across the continuum, because we know that our economy can't grow, our country can't prosper unless we all come together around the talent pool of our citizens. That's why we're here. We all share a belief that without a high-quality education, you cannot be successful in work, in life, in your community as a citizen. And that's something that we all share, and why we're working so hard on these issues, to bring urgent action around the needs of the American people.
Almost every time you see an analysis of the future of American prosperity, it begins with the realities of having a trained, capable, productive workforce. And that's true not only at the national level, but at cities and counties and states, everybody pulling together to get the maximum we can from the quality of our workforce. This is the main play for our country. And our economy will only suffer, our competitive position will suffer, if we don't work hard to generate the absolute best workforce that we can.
Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Cheryl Oldham, Executive Vice President of the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I want to welcome you to the America's Workforce Solutions Beyond the Gridlock series. We launched this series back in the spring to really move alongside the commission that you just heard referenced in the video that began today's event. The commission was launched to develop a talent strategy for the nation. And you saw our two co-chairs, Governor Bill Haslam and Governor Deval Patrick, who are leading that work. And we're digging into all sorts of issues across the talent pipeline. And this series was really designed to augment that work, to bring more expertise to the conversation, to really understand more about what's happening in the field, learn from innovators across a variety of issues. And so we've dug into data. We've talked about skills and AI. We'll do more in the worker supports space. And today we're focused on high schools. It's back to school time. And, one of those questions that I think a lot of us ask is, are our high schools preparing students for success in a rapidly changing world? It's an issue that the commission is digging into, and we're going to explore it a little bit today with our extremely talented group of panelists. We have Aaron Moat, the CEO and founder of Innovate EDU, Jay Heiler, CEO, Great Hearts Charter Schools, Shannon Nicholas, Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Colorado Succeeds, and moderating the conversation is Andy Rotherham, co-founder and senior partner at Bellwether. Andy also served on the Virginia Board of Education under two governors of both parties. And so I can't think of anybody more skilled to lead this conversation than my friend Andy. And I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today, taking time out of your day, and to this fantastic set of panelists. It was interesting, there is a lot of gridlock, but I think a place where you're not potentially seeing a lot of gridlock is high school. There's a lot of things happening really quickly, and it's happening in a bipartisan way of governors in blue states and red states talking about different ways to reimagine high schools and think about different options for kids. So it's an exciting space right now for policy, and it's an exciting space for young people. But everything's not going great. And so I think, why don't we just start with sort of the obvious elephant in the room that's been in the news a lot these past couple of weeks, which is the recent NAEP scores. And Jay, I'll start with you. Sort of when you saw the 12th grade NAEP come out, which sort of confirms a trend we've also seen in 4th and 8th grade, that the pandemic had enormous impact. We're not bouncing back, yet there are some places that are certainly green shoots that are doing better. Like, what was your takeaway from the NAEP scores, specifically, and then also sort of this broader, like, thinking about high school?
Well, it was concerning for all of us, of course, in the educational sector, and it's not new. I think we're talking about a body of concern that has existed now across multiple decades, and there have been moments of progress followed by moments of backsliding, and then some more progress, some more backsliding. High school has been at the forefront of concern about American education for a long time, Andy. You may recall Bill Gates delivered a speech. I don't know when it was. It had to be 30 years ago now, where he said, if we don't correct American high schools, our nation will be a second-rate power within 2 generations, I think is what he said. So there's been a lot of focus on this issue with high schools for a long time. And we started as a high school focused organization. We only later added elementary schools for a number of different reasons in our classical model. But our view of the necessary realities for everyone to understand about high school is that you are, of course, dealing with teenagers. And so you must have a model for educating teenagers that it captures their imaginations. It provides them something of what we all need when we're teenagers, which is to be able to figure out our place in the world and to understand the world a little bit through our adolescent years, and begin forming our character in ways that are going to shape us for the rest of our life, or at least continue forming our character during those critical years. And so the classical education model is focused on that reality. And so we are trying to provide something to teenagers through that part of their educational journey, which is so critical intellectually, but also critical in terms of the formation of who they are and what they love.
So let's pick up and build on that with Shannon and Aaron. Just talk about sort of your reaction to the scores, and were you at all surprised? Did you expect this? Why? And then what do you think it sort of tells us about this question of preparedness and what Jay started to put on the table, engaging young people in their learning?
Well, I'm happy to pick up there. I think if we looked at the 8th grade cohort for this 12th grade before, we knew the scores were not on the right track. Those scores started to decline for this 12th grade cohort in the 8th grade scores just 4 years ago. And so couple that with the pandemic, I think it was predictable that we were going to be in this spot. I do want to highlight something that is not academic that I think we need to talk about. And Jay, I think this picks up exactly on what you're talking about in terms of the types of learning experiences we need to create in high schools to engage young people. So a significant portion of the 12th graders who took the NAEP test, 31% of them, reported missing 3 or more days of school in the month prior to the assessment. 3 days a month of school. Now, if we times that out by 10 months, that means our young people are missing 30 days of school throughout their 12th grade year. That's incredibly alarming, not just in terms of the core academics that young people might be missing, but also just in terms of are young people engaged in 12th grade, in high school? And I think that answer overwhelmingly is no. And so I think we have to have a very serious conversation around how we move from a schooling experience to a learning experience, and how we create learning experiences, classical or career-based, that really speak to our young people in terms of the types of skills, competencies, and dispositions that not just prepare them for a pathway into post-secondary success, but prepare them for a pathway into workforce. And certainly Shannon is doing a lot of that work in Colorado. So I'll let her pick up on that, because I know they are really leading the way.
Yeah, Shannon, why don't you pick up on the governor there, Governor Polis, said this idea about the blurred space, and he's talked a lot about that, and you all are doing a lot with dual enrollment and so forth. So talk about the NAEP scores and sort of how that's informing your work and thinking about the questions that have been put on the table. But then specifically, let's start to segue into what can this look like.
Yeah, thanks for the tee up for sure, Aaron. I think the NAEP scores are the wake-up call, because they still are the foundational skills that young people are going to need to be successful after high school. You have to be able to read, write, and do math. But what we're talking about today is, how do you present those in a different way? How do you make school exciting again? How do you connect to more than just the academic side of a young person, but their personal interests and passions? And so I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. But we can't ignore foundational skills. Employers need folks who are going through an education system that's preparing them for those opportunities. And Andy, as you discussed, our state is really looking at, what do you have to front load in high school to get better prepared to access those opportunities after high school? You no longer have this long kind of timeline to make those decisions. Young people are having to make choices about their post-secondary experiences with a lot more risk involved. There's not enough of a safety net of jobs and opportunities that don't require something after high school. So we think the NAEP scores are a signal about readiness, but we also think there's opportunity within the education system to re-engage young people, to give them that pursuit of passion and interest again. And I think there's some exciting sort of things underway in Colorado that point to perhaps getting to this interest, access, and opportunity question that I think the high school redesign work is meant to answer.
And for people who are watching, be sure to put your questions in the chat, and we're gonna get to those. So if you ask your questions, we'll get to those a little later. But staying on this theme of front loading, let's just pause there for a second, because I think one of the things that's happening is you're seeing a push towards pathways, not just career exposure, but having kids start to do more intensive workplace kind of experiences while they're in high school, more specialization. That's definitely a trend. And yet, I think the NAEP scores illustrate, we've had 12 years and we've failed to give a lot of kids those foundational skills. And essentially, we're now starting to say, let's maybe try to do that in 10. How should we think about that? Jay, how do you all think about that in terms of making sure kids have these skills, whatever they're going to go into in life, the core stuff that every student needs?
Well, we do need to restore a certain measure of academic seriousness and academic rigor to the broad array of schools in the United States. There are many, many schools in the United States which have sort of lost their way around that. And so if you can't get that restored, you're never going to win this long twilight battle to elevate test scores. The test scores are directly downstream from the level of academic engagement that the student has undergone and embraced across a long educational journey and process. But I would also say that it's a mistake, a grave mistake in the mind of classical educators, at least, to emphasize that to the exclusion of emphasizing the development of a person's personality, the development of his or her character, the acquisition of a framework in which they can think about themselves and think about the world. And so that's what classical education tries to provide for its students. and it's something that cannot be enhanced by technology. In fact, it can be made less effective by technology. Technology can be allowed to interrupt and crowd out the necessary human interaction that teenagers are so hungry for, famously hungry for, and that we all remember ourselves from our own time as teenagers. And so we work on that in classical education, and we fundamentally believe that along with those skills, a human person also carries a lot of other things that have nothing to do with skill. They have to do with commitments. They have to do with convictions. They have to do with purposes and ends. And so if you exclude those things and you exclude that formational element from high school education, you can become as efficient as you want about the informational element, and you're still not going to get great results.
So are you worried about this trend towards it? I don't want to say vocationalizing high schools, but there's definitely a lot of the reforms now have a more utilitarian feel to them than a sort of knowledge feel. And I mean, I'll show my cards. I'm someone who's kind of, when someone tells me you can't make Shakespeare relevant to kids today, I feel like you're telling on yourself. Like, tell me you've never read Shakespeare without telling me that, because like these are sort of timeless stories. And if I was talking to an audience about this the other day. If you can't make sex, violence, and treachery interesting to adolescents, well, you're in the wrong line of work. So are you worried about this sort of? Are you worried about this trend and direction some of this is going?
Well, it's not just a trend. I mean, the utilitarian thought model for education has had its run really for decades now. Probably more than a half a century. And it has essentially failed. It has not succeeded. And so there is no escaping from the part that utility plays in our lives. It does play a part. And so we all have to understand that. So I'm not the least bit concerned about that. We face practical realities as human beings, but unlike all other animals who walk this beautiful earth, we think on a higher level, and we lead moral lives, and we hold ongoing moral conversations with ourselves and with others as we continually strive to excel and get better, become more egalitarian, provide more success to more people. All of these things that we commit ourselves to. And so you cannot technologize your way into those outcomes. Those things only come through our interactions with one another as human beings. And so, yes, we must get back to that. We must understand that. And it's so critically important for teenagers.
Aaron, how does that land with you, particularly this part? Like, what's the role of technology? Kids are going into a world where they're going to be encountering, tech as an instrumental part of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will say, Jay, I completely agree with you that I think discernment is the literacy that we need to be building in our young people. And part of that is actually informed, I think, by what's happening with technology right now. How do we help young people interrogate the inputs and the outputs of something like AI, where it's really easy to not know if the information that you're getting is truth or a hallucination. And so you have to have those foundational skills, the ability to connect information across domains, and the ability to think about discernment. And so I think that those human skills, frankly, that Jay is talking about, the ability to discuss, to be in dialogue, to connect information across subject matter and across domains, to be able to understand if information is true or false, are all skills that young people are going to need. And frankly, I think all skills all humans are going to need in the age of AI and the displacement of jobs. The ability to retrain, the ability to be a lifelong learner, that resilience, those are all skills that the learning sciences and frankly, the classics, to Jay's point, really point us to. And so that's not going to go away. And in fact, our humanness is something I think we need to double down on as we see the rise of technology. At the same time, I think our young people must have core AI literacy and digital media and digital literacy skills in order to be able to navigate how work is changing so much already and the displacement that we're already seeing from sort of information heavy jobs. And I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later around what we're seeing in terms of that displacement. But if young people aren't able to frankly like manage AI as a teammate and integrate their own human skills with AI, I think we are going to miss the boat on what is going to be a massive transformation of our workforce in an age of technology.
That makes sense. Do you think though, the sort of 21st century skills ideas coming back now wrapped up in AI, and at least in the early going, it seems to me, and even just using AI in my own work, that content knowledge piece is essential to being able to use AI effectively. And it's that domain knowledge. Otherwise, AI, it gives you things, but you struggle to make sense of either the quality the quality of those things.
Yeah, I always say AI is like a smart adult that you don't know is lying to you or not, right? You have to have that domain expertise and that discernment, if you will, at the center in order to be able to understand both the inputs and the outputs. You have to be able to interrogate that output, and you can only do that with that foundational knowledge and those foundational skills. And again, I think the ability to infer across domains. You were just talking about Shakespeare, and we use Shakespeare and references to Shakespeare all the time in our vernacular, whether you're reading a news story or you're watching, The Summer I Turned Pretty. Those are all types of Shakespearean themes. And so are you able to translate knowledge across domains, I think is really, really important as we're moving forward.
So Shannon, I mean, I'm pretty high on Colorado because I feel like you all sort of under the radar have been doing just a lot of interesting P16 work. So talk about, like, you're hearing this conversation. How is this actually showing up in the work you all are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the middle of this conversation around what's foundational, what are the expectations we want to put on all high schools. And, as I'm listening to Jay and Aaron, I'm thinking about the higher level pedagogy that we're expecting now of learners and of teaching. And for us, we believe that that might come and happen outside of a traditional classroom. And so how are we signaling to high schools that it's okay to partner and find other ways in which your young people are going to learn that might not be in front of a traditional teacher? And so what we've really set up is an expectation that all high school graduates will have some kind of experience that prepares them for life after high school. Those could be 12 college credits on an aligned pathway. Those could be an industry recognized certification or credential, or it could be a high quality work-based learning experience like an internship or an apprenticeship. And what that's signaling to schools is that we don't expect you to have to deliver every piece of information and all the content and all the learning that a young people needs. But it also is really pushing then on how you form those partnerships. What kinds of pathway opportunities do you want to present, and how do you partner with your community to provide those opportunities? So we're having to have deep conversations as a state around equity and access to those opportunities. How do we build the infrastructure for partnerships between community colleges and high schools? How do we set up work-based learning experiences that are going beyond sort of a traditional kind of come in, look at what I do, and then leave, but actually sitting with industry and working? We've studied other models across the world to understand youth apprenticeship. Many countries have lots of different systems that are operating this idea that young people can start to train. And it's not just in the skilled trades or construction, but it's in all kinds of industries like banking and finance and IT. And it again puts young people in the driver's seat of kind of the learning that they want to drive, the things that they want to connect to. It provides more mentorship, more opportunity for them to be connected to civic engagement. I think it builds on a lot of the skills we're talking about. It just does it in a way that's not always the high school teacher that has to be responsible for those things. So we're setting up some policy and some systems that will enable schools to be able to offer these opportunities And I think we are pointing to the data that is showing us that there are a lot of high school graduates that don't have that next step. They are in low wage work. They sometimes enter into college and don't complete that first year of college. We have to provide these on-ramps to what's after high school, because at the end of the day, I want well-rounded civic humans, but I also want people who can be employable. And when we talk to the business community, there's specific sectors and industries that are in high demand and high opportunity, but you need to build a set of skills to be able to access those jobs.
If I could just jump in here and plus up something that Shannon is saying, one of the models that I really love in the apprenticeship space, specifically in education, is a model that's running out of Ball State, which is this incredible model where they take high schoolers who might want to be teachers and they say, hey, we're going to offer you a wage in 11th and 12th grade. You're going to work in after school programs and you're going to figure out if you like working with kids. If you want to be an educator, if you want to pursue potentially a teaching career. And so what's so interesting about this is not just the earn and learn, but at Ball State and in this program, they have this on-ramp, but they also have an off-ramp. They don't expect that every young person who has this experience in high school is going to raise their hand and say, I want to be a teacher. They actually predict that about 50% of their young people are going to opt out of wanting to be an educator and choose that pathway. And so their pre-apprenticeship to apprenticeship pathway is really authentically about career exploration and providing young people not just with the on-ramp, but the off-ramp, and making that okay if you discover that this isn't maybe the right path for you. So I love that point about on-ramps, and it's also about this point about off-ramps in case through that exploration, young people say, hey, this isn't the right path for me. And I think that applies if you want to be a computer scientist or you want to be a science teacher.
Yeah,
So,
this you
Andy,
actually anticipate.
it might surprise you all to know that Great Hearts has actually been asked to design a high school model, which is both classical and vocational. And so we are working on that right now. We're working on a feasibility study for the Envision School, and then beginning work shortly on the actual design of that school, which will involve externships for the upperclassmen in workplaces, engaging while still teenagers and still in high school with workplace environments that we are going to have to give a lot of thought to carefully curating and so forth in different ways. But so I bring this up to say that, you know, these things are not all necessarily dichotomous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is a way to restore elements, critical elements of classical education to school models which are no longer purely academic. They are both academic and practical, and in some way vocational, or broadening the educational experience and event for the students by giving them exposure to actual workplace environments, and problem solving and things of that nature that happen there. So there are ways of proceeding here to meet all sort of individual objectives, cultural objectives, and economic and workplace objectives. But we would assert that you must begin with accepting that education is fundamentally the formation of the human person. It is not fundamentally, it's not machine learning. It's not pail filling, it's fire lighting, as has been said across the centuries. And so as long as we can begin with that, then there's any number of different, I think, ways of bringing about educational models and pathways that can truly both serve the fully free and fully formed human person and you know, the necessary practical realities of being able to work productively in a shifting economy.
Let's tug on that for a second, because I'm glad you raised. That's where I wanted to go. And like we say, okay, it's not dichotomous, but this field boy, this field loves itself some dichotomous stuff, right? Like, and so there's over the years, there's a lot of reforms that have been put forward as an and. I mean, you can start with like John Dewey and most of his ideas. He was talking in the language of and because there was things he just assumed about high schools and knowledge that kids were going to get. And he was talking about other things, but the sector internalized it very much as an or. And you see that again and again. And so, like, I hear you, but I worry, and I want to hear from Shannon and how you guys are addressing this in Colorado. And Aaron, I want to come back to this issue of off ramps in a sec. But first, this we say, well, it can be both. And Gene Bottoms, who for a long time at SREB in the South had a network of high schools that was doing both. It was very successful, but it didn't take, right? Because we like ors, and we got back, everybody's got back to fighting about whether it was, you know, who was college material or whatever. So talk about how do we make this moment an and not just another or?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's a full rebrand of what career and technical education is, and that it is no longer, you know, the 30-year-old tracking system that our country put a lot of young people, you know, on a road to not sort of economic mobility and opportunity. And that was a decision that a counselor or a teacher made for a young person. What we're talking about is a economy that requires some sort of form of post-secondary, but we have to redefine what success looks like after high school, and that we need to broaden the opportunity that it could be an industry certification, a credential, or some post-secondary college credit, but not a full bachelor's. We're also talking a lot about how do you put these things together, because we know that there's going to be this major transition and disruption in the workforce. And so you don't want dead ends. You want folks to be able to continue to build skill. And in the kind of modern economy, that's through, you know, bachelor's degrees and advanced degrees. But I think we are really wrestling with how do you put career and tech education on the same pedestal that the four-year college model has had. And so we're doing deep, deep work in Colorado to make sure that kids in CTE are getting college credit while they're in high school at no cost to them. We're talking about an apprenticeship model that is, you know, paid work. Employers are committing to hiring those young people after 2 or 3 years in the apprenticeship at livable wages. We're looking at data on these pathways and making sure that if young people are being told that they are going to access these opportunities, that there's something at the end of that for them and that these aren't false promises. So, you know, the data right now is not great for kids who go to college. We have really, really, you know, a lot of work to do on even that four-year model, but we have to make sure that we're looking at outcomes, and I think our state is very committed to that. But it's also, you know, again, like Aaron said, this isn't just a pipeline of widgets. We're developing young people. They're asking more questions about who they are and what they want to do. They're more connected to opportunities, and they may start to innovate themselves on what they want to build for the next kind of economies. I'm seeing this in rural Colorado, where old economies are changing and new folks are moving into those communities, and they're engaging with their high school students to deliver on a new economic opportunity in that community. So this is about rebuilding things. It's about building new opportunity, but the traditional pathway is not working for the majority of young people right now. And so our work is to make sure that there is a lot of choice after high school, and you've tested what might be the best choice for you while you're in high school.
Yeah, let's hold on to that, Shannon. I want to come back to that, in particular this labor market, but let's stay on something else. You know, early in the conversation, Jay said, you know, we're talking about teenagers with everything they bring, and Aaron a moment ago talked about off ramps, and I want to sort of stitch those together and push on that, because one of my concerns has been we say we want off ramps, but then we look at countries that are fairly fixed and don't have a lot of off ramps as models. And the U.S. is it's very much a second chance system where people, you know, who haven't necessarily done well in school, we encourage them to continue trying and trying different things. And you know, one thing about teenagers is anyone who's parented one or perhaps was one themselves will remember, like, they're not great at making decisions. I mean, a lot of us aren't great at making decisions in general, but teenagers are acutely challenged there. And so you need off ramps. And so, like in Virginia, we've got these new lab schools we brought online, which are partnerships between school districts and universities. And they're for the, you know, everything from the health trades and Amazon web certifications to shipbuilding and aerospace. But one of the first things we would ask when we were going through the process of evaluating which ones we were going to let open was, how do kids get back to their home school if they decide this is not for them, or get out of a program back into, if they decide, because you want people to be able to change their mind, as the teaching example, you discover you don't actually like that, or you hear this a lot in the health trades, kids get like a CNA and then discover, whoa, they didn't, that actually, they didn't actually think the job was going to be like what the job actually is, and that kind of work they don't want to do. um so let's talk about this question. How do you design this in such a way that you have genuine off ramps and sort of pathways don't become fixed paths? So you can combine what Jay is talking about with sort of, rich learning, exposing kids to things. But someone mentioned equity. It seems like true equity is actually not making a path choice. It's the ability to change. That's what empowered people can do. So there's a lot there in that question, but
Yeah.
I think you're going to have, I think what's going to happen in the immediate future, and it's already happening to some significant degree, is the established dichotomy between going to college or entering the workplace is going to get blurred. Already we're blurring, we're earning college credits now while still in high school. In many places, there are opportunities for kids now to receive a full associate's, and in some cases, even a bachelor's degree before they even leave high school. And then you're also going to see the opportunity for kids to take some of those college credits because they've already achieved them, then go into a professional environment, but still carry on their higher education in some regard, in addition to beginning their workplace. You're going to see hybridized pathways for people to take. And you're going to see people continuing to use online degree programs and credential programs now at any point along their professional pathway to keep carrying on their education. And then you'll also see what we have now. You'll see some people graduate from high school and go enter the workplace, and you'll see lots of people graduate from high school and go enter a four-year college. But there will be a sort of blurring of that line, I think, with all kinds of other pathways now that people are going to be able to take. But again, I hate to be Johnny One Note about this, but no matter what those pathways come to encompass, wherever you go, as they say, there you are. And so who is the person, who is the human person who is going on whatever pathway? And what are not only their skills, but what are their virtues? What are their commitments? What are their passions? What are those things that they love? What is it about life beyond work that they cherish and wish to pursue and envision themselves experiencing? And so our work life is really only one part of our experience as human beings. And admittedly, it's an important one, but in the end, we all know it doesn't end up mattering as much as all those other things that all stem from who we are. And so it's just vitally important for education and the education sector to get back to understanding that.
And Jay, I would argue that the way in which so many young people can find out who they are is if they're put into real world experiences and connecting with other adults outside of classrooms. I think we're so much closer on this than not. And Andy, I think what keeps me up at night is not the student who was in a CNA program and decided not to be a CNA anymore, but the 70% of kids who have nothing after high school because they have not been engaged in a way where they've been able to try something, they've been able to think about those opportunities in really specific and concrete ways. I walk through these high schools in Colorado that have completely redesigned their experiences for young people. The energy, the interest, the self-awareness, the knowledge building, the teachers are thrilled and excited to be there because they're really connecting with, a different kind of teaching and learning. When we go back to sort of this higher level pedagogy, that's way, way more interesting. And no high school is being held accountable to what job that kid has after high school, but they are being held accountable now to what happens to them after high school. And we have a specific set of criteria we're looking at it's not just about getting that job, but it's about what is that next step. And I think it's really important for us to have a bigger view of what happens after high school and to make sure that high schools are thinking deeply about what happens to those 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and not just sort of hoping that they get to the next step.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I would suggest though that that kid who is now 19 or 20, and we have a lot of room to grow to be providing navigation support for those kids, and has discovered that whatever their initial thing was, maybe it was the military, say it didn't work for them. That kid is in a bad way as well. And not to say that the kid who came out without skills isn't. They both, I think, are in different ways. There's not an infrastructure there to help them where there could be. Aaron, I saw you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about the needing to shift from schooling to learning. I think what both Shannon and JR are talking about is moving from compliance to agency. And so, when I think about my kids who are not yet in high school, and I sort of dread the day we cross that transom, to be honest. But I think about the types of skills that I know they're going to need to have, and I think about John Seely Brown's work, right? Who talked about our grandparents were on steamships where they set the direction and the steamship got to where it wanted to be. We were on sailboats where we needed to skillfully tact, but we largely knew where the destination was. Our young people today are whitewater kayakers. They need to be able to read the currents and know where the rocks are so they don't crash into it. Andy, what you're talking about on-ramps and off-ramps, about the ability to have that resilience isn't new. That's based in what we know about the learning sciences, about that higher order pedagogy that Shannon's talking about the sort of anchoring in personal autonomy that Jay's talking about, the ability to understand themselves, to have the resilience, to be able to pivot. So that when they hit that rock as a whitewater kayaker, they're able to, get over it or turn the kayak around. And so these are the types of learning experiences we need to create. They're definitely in the workplace. They're definitely, frankly, in working with people who might be different than you, this ability to have to understand how to persuade, have to engage in discourse and dialogue. And when we think about those skills, when you talk to Fortune 500 CEOs or you talk to the guy who owns the local welding business, the ability to interact with others, the ability to have a set of core domain expertise, but also the ability to problem solve are the things that matter sort of no matter what career you're going into. And so we have to shift high school. We must. And we must not just think about shifting high school, but I would provoke folks to even think about before high school. What are we doing in order to shape those experiences?
So there's a bunch of directions we could go. Let's pivot a little bit towards policy and what can enable this, or what can get in the way. And Shannon, I'll start with you. I mean, you all have had fairly stable governance for a while, and I'm sure that's helped. But talk about like what do we need in terms of policy here, like optimally, and what are some barriers that if you're trying to think about redesigning high schools? Really, I mean, I think this is a place, there's different views on what it should look like amongst the four of us, but everybody thinks high schools need to change in various ways. So what are the barriers?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that we've benefited from is a bipartisan view on this. I think most policymakers see the benefit of making sure more young people have quality educational experiences, graduate high school. That's definitely on most governors' radar if they have, graduation rate declines or concerns. And so this is a big sell to the left and the right. Which is hard these days to find things that they find together. So Colorado has benefited from that for sure. And I think one of the things that we also have is local control. So our state is never going to mandate what high schools should teach, how they should, award diplomas. But again, there's this state level vision and commitment that we have to rethink. The things that we run up against are sort of the outdated seat time, how we think about teaching and learning from a credit hours perspective. The thing we have to work on with local control is how are kids getting credit for what they're learning? And if you are in an experience where you're getting math or you're getting science, you're getting exposed to those things and you're going through the academic standards, can you do that outside of a traditional classroom and still get credit for that? So instead of adding on to a kid's experience, are you completely changing where they get the content knowledge, and how do you validate and kind of make sure that that is truly the state standards that we've set? I talked a little
And
bit.
how do we do that? Pause on that, because I think this is that's like, I think competency-based sounds great in theory, and a lot of us are very supportive of it and moving away from seat time. But this is a field that struggles with measures of quality and quality assurance and accountability. And so there's a lot of, I mean, we're fighting fights in schools now about whether kids should read books or not. So there's a lot of concern that if not, those measures of quality, if not done right, will end up being a de facto lowering of standards, either across the board or for certain groups of kids. So talk about like how you're thinking about that very specific question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are trying to set up more systems for common governance of things like internships, and that there could be regional frameworks for expectations on both quality in terms of what a student is expected to do and get out of that experience. There's adults within the classroom, within the school building, and adults within the workplace who are validating, who are walking through a crosswalk of what those expected skills are that they'll be receiving in the sort of 8-week experience. And then the educator team is validating that those are connected to the standards. This is not easy work to do. This is not, lowering the bar. In fact, I would say in many cases, folks are having a fine-tooth comb over really mapping the curriculum and the experience. But the work is necessary in order to make sure that we really are giving kids high quality experiences, and then putting that credit toward it validates it that you are learning, and that this isn't extracurricular, this isn't a college resume booster, this is academic and sort of that next step progression. The same thing's happening in concurrent and dual enrollment. We have really, robust teacher licensure systems where the higher ed institutions are validating the credentialed experiences of the educators that are in front of high school students. So you're not lowering the bar, you're putting college accredited teachers in front of high school students. So you do have to create systems and structures by which you hold, both sides of the coin accountable. But I think that work is necessary and needed in order to provide the level of experience so that it's not add-on, it's not extracurricular, it's not just the internship that your dad got you at the bank so that you have something to do that summer. It truly is about the high school redesign work. But we think that this could change capacity needs then at the high school. How do you rethink your staffing models and who you actually need to hire for? So there's big shifts that can come from this if you devote the time to setting up the systems and structures that are needed to implement.
And that's a policy play. Jay, what do you want to see out of policy, either more of or less of, to help enable this?
I really don't. Of course, I believe in school choice as a policy, because I think over time that tends toward bringing about better solutions by bringing some market dynamics into play. So I favor continuation of that policy, which has been largely the direction in most of the country. But I really don't think at the end of the day, this is really a question of policy. It's a question of philosophy. It's a question of what are we trying to do with the education of the next generation? It's a question of intents and purposes. And so I just think we've got to get back to understanding that education is formational before it's informational, and that the human person is the most profound and amazing and wondrous thing in terms of all that we are able to accomplish, all that we are able to achieve, all that we are able to be on the one hand, and then all the tragedy that we are able to make out of ourselves and one another on the other. And so we have to keep our eye on that ball. That's the fundamental reality of our existence as human beings. And so we all must be formed somehow into agents of of virtue, of the good, of the true. And so, we have to understand that a lot of that is going to happen when we're teenagers. And that's when we're going to face a really big dichotomy about those big questions. And so I believe high schools have to help kids through that. And that there's nothing exclusive about doing that and also helping them get ready for their practical, professional, and work lives.
Okay, Aaron, the policy question, we're going to get some of the questions from the audience. Like, what do you see as either big enablers or big barriers?
Yeah, I think Shannon's point about holding quality is essential, that the experiences that young people have to have a quality bar. And whether you do that, for example, through national guideline standards for apprenticeships that are approved by the Department of Labor, or you do that through rigorous accreditation, that's really important. I think the access and opportunity divide is something we have to take on. Even when I created a high school in downtown Brooklyn, I struggled to find an AP computer science teacher. Imagine if you're in a rural school and you want to offer that opportunity to young people. One of the things we need to continue to invest in is making sure that our rural schools have connectivity to be able to promote equal access and opportunity to all of these types of opportunities that might exist in Denver, but not in Cannon City, for example, in Colorado. And then we have to innovate in assessment. When I ran a school, I often felt like I was taking inventory of my students, where we would shut the store down for 3 days and take a summative assessment, which we wouldn't get the data back until October or November the following year, and it was useless. We need to innovate in assessment. I feel there is a compelling reason to do so, while also holding that quality bar. Until we do that, Andy, we're not going to be able to fully embrace competency-based education.
Aaron, I feel the need to just highlight that Canyon City and Fremont County did invest in broadband about 15 years ago and is one of the leading rural communities to offering these kinds of experiences, largely because people are moving there who have jobs that are, tech enabled, so they can live anywhere and work anywhere, but they've created a co-working space where young people can then intern with these really innovative and quite amazing, international companies. So just funny that you called them out, but I totally agree that rural needs these opportunities, and broadband is a way that's been able to provide access specifically for Canyon City.
They're a really good example of when you invest in broadband. They're one of our AI policy labs with Innovate EDU. So I know that model super intimately, and they're meeting this challenge of digital literacy and AI literacy in their community at scale because they have made these investments. But that's not something I think we're seeing in rural communities across the country.
Yeah, rural is one community that can be disconnected technologically, geographically, and underinvested in on this. Another is a group of students who are everywhere, but I'm surprised how often they're overlooked, especially when you talk to people about the achievement gap and where we're seeing, you don't often hear, people talk about special ed students, but they have some of the biggest quality problems in terms of what's being provided to them. So talk about how, this is a question from someone in the audience. Talk about how do special ed kids fit into the equation you all are talking about, these different approaches to make sure
You've
that they're
alluded to the
getting
labor
adequately
market
served.
issues, Andy, and that has become a fairly acute problem across, I believe, just about every part of the education sector. So the numbers of students requiring special ed attention have gone up. They were going up already, and they spiked even higher during COVID and after COVID, whereas the numbers of available faculty and compliant, regulatorily compliant faculty continues to be low, not high enough. And so there's a very serious problem going on out there where everybody is struggling to meet the needs of special education students. And it is driven in part by a labor shortage.
1 in 5 students in this country is a student with disabilities. And so that means that, those students aren't just confined to special education classrooms, 12 to 1-to-1s or 10 to 1-to-1s. They're in every classroom in this country. And so one way I think, Andy, we take this on, again, I'm going to fall back to the learning sciences and universal design for learning. I think when we design learning experiences that are about shoveling the ramp rather than shoveling the stairs, everybody can take advantage of those opportunities. And so working with employers who have experience and bringing them into the fold, to Shannon's point about having more direct conversations and partnerships with employers and saying, hey, like, are you interested in, supporting a cohort of students who, is going to need some particular on-ramps. There's some great partnerships nationally with the ARC and other organizations who have been National Council for Learning Disabilities, who has understood.org, who has some great resources that are available out there for employers, for folks to really build empathy around how to navigate potentially working with a student who has learning differences. And so I would just really urge, as again, we're moving from compliance to agency, when we're moving from schooling to learning, that we're really thinking about universal design for learning, not just because that benefits students with disabilities, but frankly, it benefits all students to have those experiences that build empathy.
Shannon, how are you all in Colorado thinking about how to make sure that these students serve equitably under all these initiatives that are emerging in your blurred space?
Yeah, I think for us, it's about highlighting examples of local communities who've been able to integrate all students into these kinds of experiences. Again, we're not talking about a subset of a school building. We're talking about all high school students having opportunities in these spaces. And I think it is about connecting with learners in different ways. And so we're leaving the options open on how you do it, but the folks closest to the students are going to know the best ways to engage those students, the kinds of opportunities that they might want to be involved in. But we've been able to highlight different kinds of examples, whether that be running a school business that's based in the school, where maybe the educators do need to be closer to the learners and they're not quite ready for the workforce training opportunities. Or like Erin said, there's lots of employers who do these kinds of workforce programming for, students who are 18 to 22 or even outside of that age group. How do you embed them into your planning process, into your community process in the high school, so that you get the expertise and the folks who've designed those kinds of workplace experiences for a variety of learners?
So another question we have, and it'll tie back to this rural question, because it's about sort of, demographics, population density, and just you can see how this can happen in areas where there's more density. You guys just gave an example of a rural community that's using technology. So talk more about that. Like, there's a wide, range of experiences. Sort of, how do we do more to make sure, sort of across geographies and in places where you don't have that level of population density and service density, kids are getting high quality exposure to this, and those communities are not even further disconnected than in some cases they are now?
So in Colorado, what we've been focusing on is rural collaboratives. We've seen this model play out in other states. Texas kind of has a pretty big infrastructure for it. I would say Colorado's on the sort of piloting stage of this work. But what we're really focused on is, every high school can't build a CTE center that has 6 pathways and all the different opportunities. We talked about, just being able to hire one teacher might be a challenge for a subject area or for a region. And so there's really been this sense of the rural communities are unique and different across our landscape, but can they work together to build hubs or interdistrict agreements where students can ride a bus from one facility to another, so that they're working together on a set of regional priorities, but they're still sort of keeping their home high school bases, their traditional sort of core classes. Maybe those kids are still playing on the home football team, like the things that are sort of core to what those students and those families have said they want in their high school experience are still there, but they are partnering on the workplace learning, on the industry certifications and credentials, partnering with the higher ed institutions of their region to really think about this P20 experience. So you're not just trying to kind of put more on top of an already very strained high school. That seems to be working so far, and as that we aren't funding it at the levels that I think those intermediary groups and those organizations would like to see, but at least there is this common sort of definition of regional need, and then building the infrastructure and support through those industry partnerships and those higher ed partners who can also provide capacity and other, facilities, things like that. So we're really trying to create a sense of a region instead of these district boundaries that are sometimes often very random and not necessarily where employers are in the community or where folks are already driving across county lines to get to their, place of work. It becomes much more a vision setting of what that region should be accountable to and what they're going to need in terms of their local economies.
Okay, Aaron, lightning round. What other examples are you seeing nationally in your work that Shannon didn't already share with us? Other kinds of models to address this issue of making sure communities are not disconnected.
Yeah, using employers as an anchor place. I saw this both during COVID, but also it's continued in places like rural Kentucky, using the Tyson chicken factory to be the place that you get robust internet connectivity so you can take college courses. It's happening. So it's like a really different type of employer partnership, maybe about the building and the facility rather than the, the type of learning experience. I think work that's happening again to really focus on this idea that in our region, we have a diversity of actors, and connecting those actors, whether that's through connectivity or through occasional experiences like mentor experiences once a month. I'm seeing that happen in, rural and upstate New York and other places. And so I think it's about people, connectivity, and looking at the assets in a given footprint and saying, how can I imagine an uncommon alliance here?
That's great. Jay, I'm going to give you the last word because if I'm not mistaken, your schools came through the pandemic, learning loss, all of that, much better off, much more resilient than a lot of other schools. What's the lesson? Because I think that's the core thing we're trying to do is create resilient young people. Like very briefly, what's the lesson we should take away from that?
Well, one of the lessons was, the old Woody Allen, 90% of life is showing up. And so we showed up. We didn't leave the schools closed going into the next school year after the spring arrival of the pandemic. Everybody was forced to close then, but we opened the schools on time and got back to work. And we did do well. I would say though that we continue to see evidence of lingering effects of the pandemic in our academic results, and so we have not yet fully recovered from it. But beyond showing up, the lesson is that students have to be convinced to engage through some framework in a relatively serious level of study. I mean, getting an education is no different than any other thing. The more you put into it, the more you study, the more educated you're going to become.
I think that goes for all of us in terms of what we put into providing these kinds of experiences, kinds of quality. Thank you all very much, all three of you. That was fantastic. Thank you all for joining us. It's my pleasure to turn it back over to my friend and colleague, Cheryl, to bring us home.
Thank you, Shannon, Aaron, and Jay. What a fantastic conversation. And Andy, masterful job at flawlessly guiding the discussion and covering so much territory. A couple highlights for me. I really appreciated Shannon's focus on sort of this blurred space between high school and post-secondary and work. Aaron mentioned really, needing to shift from a quote schooling experience to a learning experience. The panel really began the conversation focused on foundational skills as still critical: reading, writing, and doing math. We can't ignore these really critical skills. That academic rigor is still really important, while we also think about tapping into students' interests and access and opportunity. Human skills, discernment, resilience, lifelong learning, also critical in the age of AI. And of course, really appreciated the work of Great Hearts and Jay's talk of a new model that they're working on where they will blend both classical education and this idea of a vocational high school. Is so exciting. Appreciated, the policy callouts, the questions from the audience around special education students, certainly, and the needs of students in rural communities. As BPC advances the Commission on the American Workforce and its national strategy, we remain committed to elevating the voices of practitioners and policymakers who are driving bipartisan, on-the-ground solutions. Please stay tuned for upcoming events. Next month in October, we'll turn our attention to worker supports and childcare, two really critical areas for strengthening the American workforce. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.